Beneath the Pacific's gentle waves, Oceania's islands hide blood-soaked secrets that whisper in the dark. On a moonless Rarotongan night, gunfire tore through the island's tranquil veil. Chris Rimamoto, a man once trusted by his community, carried a festering wound of rejection after his girlfriend, Mary Dean, left him for another. Convicted of assaulting a child, he was allowed to roam under lax prison rules, his resentment simmering as he labored in community service. On October 19, 2016, he saw Mary's car parked at Roger Tawaria's home, and something snapped. Retrieving a hidden rifle from a shipping container, he slipped past two distracted guards, his pulse racing with vengeance. He stormed to Roger's house, the rifle's cold weight steady in his hands, and unleashed a storm of 20 bullets. Mary and Roger crumpled in their driveway, blood pooling beneath them, their bodies riddled with jagged wounds that glistened under the stars. The sheer excess of gunfire, bullets piercing flesh, bone, and walls, marked his rage, a frenzied signature that left the island reeling. Rimamoto vanished into Rarotonga's quiet streets, blending into the familiarity of his old haunts, exploiting the island's small, trusting community where no one locked their doors. The police, unprepared for such violence, fumbled, leaving Mary's parents to learn of her death through a cruel Facebook post, their grief compounded by the absence of an ambulance as bystanders drove the dying to the hospital. A manhunt finally cornered him in a Titicaca house on October 20th, where after a tense standoff, he turned the rifle on himself, his blood staining the floor as the police waited hours to enter. His suicide ended the nightmare, but the island's trust in its open prison shattered, leaving a legacy of tightened chains and a community haunted by the echo of those gunshots. The blood-soaked driveway fades into the restless waves of Fiji, where a boat drifted, its deck painted with crimson horror. Dipchand, a grandfatherly figure to the Latta sisters, Radhika, Renuka, and Ashika, hid a predator's heart beneath his kindly facade. A serial rapist facing 10 charges, he was free on his own recognizance, his charm masking a volatile temper. On June 26, 2005, he took the sisters fishing to Malake Island, a trip they'd enjoyed before, but an argument with Ashika ignited his rage. In a frenzy, he seized a wooden stick, its rough grain splintering as he struck her skull, blood spraying across the boat's deck. Radhika and Renuka screamed, but he turned on them, beating their heads until they lay still, their faces unrecognizable. His signature was the chilling disposal. He hurled their unconscious bodies into the ocean, their blood trailing in the water as sharks circled. Chand sailed back, claiming unknown men attacked, his lies slipping past initial scrutiny in Fiji's under-resourced police force. He resumed his quiet life, the boat's bloodstains his only witness, until DNA and his own confession betrayed him. Prosecutors secured a rare bodiless conviction, and he was sentenced to life, with parole possible after 19 years. His appeals, fueled by questionable evidence, linger like the sisters' unrecovered bodies, lost to the sea's depths, their absence a wound that festers in Fiji's memory. The ocean's churn dissolves into Kiribati's Butaratari atoll, where a village burned with collective fury. The Anamwain elders, revered yet vengeful, deemed Tiwanakunua's residents guilty of vague wrongs, their authority unchallenged in Kiribati's tight-knit society. On October 27, 2004, they rallied a mob armed with clubs and stones, their anger boiling over into a riot. They torched homes, flames licking the night sky, but their wrath focused on Toonie Timon, who dared protest. The mob chased him to a lagoon, their stones cracking his skull, blood streaming into the water as they beat him to death, then tossed his body over a seawall like refuse. The actee's brutality, stoning a man to death in sacred waters, etched a gruesome mark on Kiribati's history. The mob's size and the elders' influence shielded the killers, blending into village life as police struggled to investigate with scant resources. Only three, Teoti Toraman, Tokantatake Katia, and Keautintun Tarabo, the riotous instigator, were convicted, their life sentences a rare reckoning. The lagoon's ripples still carry Toonie's screams, a reminder of unchecked power and a community's descent into savagery, into Samoa's humid night, where a jail cell held a man drowning in his own despair. Hans Dalton, a New Zealander visiting for his aunt's birthday, unraveled when Cyclone Evan cut off his mental health medication on December 26, 2012. His erratic behavior, smashing a hospital door, threatening staff, landed him in Tafagata jail. 6 officers pinned him down, his screams echoing through Apia's concrete walls. By morning, he was found face down in a water drum, his body bruised, blood seeping from unseen wounds. The chilling image of his corpse submerged, hands limp in the murky water, branded the case with mystery, suicide, or murder. Dalton's mental collapse let him slip through Samoa's understaffed system, his threats dismissed as madness, delaying scrutiny. Police stonewalled inquiries, but inmate Jonathan Patrick Crichton, already a convicted killer, was charged with his death. His conviction was overturned, backed by Dalton's mother, leaving the case undetermined. The drum's ripples hold the truth, a whisper of violence or despair that Samoa's silence buries. In the pre-dawn hours of April 13, 1996, Marlon Barnes, a 22-year-old linebacker for the Hurricanes football team, and his friend Timwanika Lumpkins, 23, were found in Barnes' third-floor apartment at 29 Settleview 57th Avenue. Barely clinging to life, Barnes' roommate, Earl Little, stumbled upon the carnage around 7:30 a.m., the air thick with blood and terror. Marlon's face was unrecognizable, pulpified by relentless blows, his skull fractured, brain swelling from savage blunt force. Timwanika, curled near him, bore gaping wounds to the back of her head, her scalp split, blood matting her hair. Both were beaten with shotguns, but the weapon's barrel later used to blast Marlon's head at close range, leaving his jaw shattered and teeth scattered. Timwanika, still breathing when found, succumbed during an airlift to Jackson Memorial Hospital, her toddler daughter now an orphan. Marlon died minutes after discovery, his 6'1", 215-pound frame no match for the ferocity. Police, per A 1996, Miami Herald report, found the apartment awash in blood with signs of a frenzied attack. The murder weapon, a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun, was recovered nearby, stolen from a teammate's car days early. Weeks later, on May 2nd, LaBrant Dennis, 23, Timwanika's ex-boyfriend and father of her child, was arrested. Dennis had a history of violence. Court records showed a 1994 domestic battery charge against Tim Wanaka, and witnesses reported his jealousy over her friendship with Marla. The Florida Supreme Court ruling 2000 detailed the evidence. Dennis' fingerprint on the shotgun, his DNA on a bloody shirt nearby, and a witness, Yolanda Russell, who saw him near the apartment at 3:00 a.m., hours before the bodies were found. A jailhouse informant claimed Dennis confessed, boasting he took care of business. Tried in 1998, Dennis was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His 2000 appeal overturned the sentence due to improper jury instructions, but a 2002 retrial reaffirmed his guilt and death penalty, upheld in 2004. Could Dennis have acted alone? The brutality, over 30 blows to Marlon's head and 20 to Tim Wanaka's, suggests a rage-fueled frenzy, but the logistics raise questions. The shotgun, heavy and unwieldy, was used both to bludgeon and shoot, requiring strength and time. A 1996 Sun-Sentinel article noted the attack's duration, with neighbors hearing screams from 2:00 to 3:00 a.m., suggesting a prolonged assault. Some theorize an accomplice aided Dennis, possibly to subdue Marlene, a formidable athlete. Ex-posts on Our True Crime speculate a second person held the victims while Dennis struck, citing the precision of the blows and the absence of defensive wounds on Tim Wanaka's arms. Yet, police found no additional fingerprints or DNA, and Dennis' possessive motive, fueled by Tim Wanaka's new life post-breakup, points to a lone killer driven by personal vendetta. A 2023 Miami Herald retrospective confirmed no new suspects, with Dennis still on death row at Union Correctional Institution as of August 2025. His appeals exhausted. The blood-soaked apartment, Marlon's shattered face, and Tim Wanaka's broken skull linger as a grim echo, the rain carrying us to another tragedy. On July 4, 2009, several faculty members of the Finance Department of Chinese University met up to work overtime at the university to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. 43-year-old Tan Chenghui, a faculty member, was one many had expected to be present, and yet he was nowhere to be found. A man simply referred to as Ma called Chenghui's mobile phone at 11:00 a.m., but nobody answered. The workload was too heavy for Ma to get too concerned, and he initially wasn't worried because Chenghui's family had adopted a stray dog. However, their dog had a skin disease, and Chenghui had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma wasn't worried and assumed that's what he did. On July 5th, the university's finance department held its work meeting, but Chenghui failed to show up for a second time. Ma once again called his mobile phone, and once again was met with no answer. Ma, unfortunately, didn't know his landline phone, so he couldn't call back. On July 6th, it had been 2 days of Ma not showing up to work, nor having any contact with his co-workers. Eventually, one of his co-workers reported the situation to the university's finance department. Chenghui's superiors did know his house's landline phone, so they called that number, but just like his cell phone, no one picked up. They then called the library where his 33-year-old wife, Tang Inyi, worked at. According to the library staff, she was absent from work too, and didn't book any days off. The couple were from Zhongshan in mainland China's Guangdong province and were married for 11 years. 11 years prior, Enyi gave birth to their eldest daughter, 10-year-old Tan Xiaowen, and later their youngest daughter, 7-year-old Tan Xiaoying. Although their living conditions and financial situation were not great, and they lived in an abandoned recycling station on Wuzhou South Road, they were described as kind, happy, cheerful, and upbeat people, with their children being well behaved. Cheng Wei was known to take his daughters into town to have fun. So many may have thought that the family opted to take a vacation to spend time together, but something came up which stopped them from returning. His colleagues spent the next while repeatedly calling his mobile in-house phone in hopes that something different would happen. Eventually, someone finally answered, but rather than being a member of the family, it was a strange, unfamiliar man who sounded middle-aged. The man claimed to be Cheng Wei's cousin, and that the family had gone to Dongguan in the mainland's Guangdong province for summer vacation, and that Cheng Wei had gifted him his personal phone for safekeeping. He said he didn't know when the family would return to Hong Kong, and after repeated questions, he hung up and turned the mobile phone off. The only thing this call succeeded in doing was making Cheng Wei's co-workers even more suspicious and worried. Cheng Wei was always diligent and measured, having never left work without reason, and if he were to go on a vacation with his children, he would have worked things out with their school first. The family also took care of 9 stray dogs, which left the question of who would be caring for them if they went away to the mainland, and how they would afford their vacation to China. Cheng Wei also used to live with his parents, a father who was a sailor, and his mother who worked at a paper mill, which was closed down by now. However, his father went missing without a trace and was never found, leading to his mother going ill, which left her in a nursing home. I can't find any more information on his missing father. If you can let me know. It was seen as drastically out of character for Cheng Wei to abandon her when he visited her weekly. Eventually, they decided to call the police. One of Cheng Wei's colleagues led the police to Cheng Wei's home at the abandoned recycling station in Pingshe village. On the way there, a curious event had happened. They saw a short man from a distance from the fence of the Tan family and quickly disappearing from view. Initially, nothing was thought of this, and they continued on. Once they reached the gate to their home, they found it locked. The police surveyed the property and questioned the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covers an area of nearly 450 square meters. Its construction area is only 90 square meters, and nearly 350 square meters are empty flower beds. The building was also illegal. The original owner randomly built several tin houses on the foundation as a waste recycling site, and the stone house on the other side was used as a pig farm, with almost no people living there. So the police only had one neighbor to question, an elderly woman named Huang, who lived alone across the street, said that she lived in the area for a long time. She knew their schedule, and that in the afternoon, they usually spent it tending to their garden. But aside from that, she didn't know too much about their personal life. She said that due to the remote location, the family didn't have many relatives coming to visit. The only acquaintance of theirs that she knew of was Cheng Wei's middle-aged cousin, simply named Shu Pi. Huang didn't know much about Shu aside from overhearing Andy Wei mentioning that Cheng Wei's uncle lived in a nearby stone house. Cheng Wei's colleague told the police about his phone being answered by his cousin, with the police assuming that the man on the other end was Xu Lai. Huang didn't know Xu's address or the address of this uncle, but she did hear cries of help from the house on July 5, so the police mobilized several officers to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingche village. Investigators later that same day managed to track the man down at a stone house at number 74 Wuzhou Road. The man was 42-year-old Xu Shangqing, and he confirmed that he was Cheng Wei's cousin. He said that he usually visited the family home to help renovate and work on the garden, and when asked about the contents of the phone call, he stood by his story that the family went to China for vacation. He said that on July 5th, Cheng Wei visited his mother at the nursing home before returning to the home and telling him that he planned on going to Dongguan, China for a few days. The roaming fee for bringing his Hong Kong mobile phone into the mainland would have been too expensive, so he asked him to hold on to it until he got back. And the person police and Cheng Wei's colleague witnessed fleeing was actually Xu leaving after feeding the family dog. Cheng Chi's body language and expressions were observed, and he didn't seem the least bit troubled, and there were seemingly no glaring inconsistencies with his story. They asked Cheng Chi if he had a key to the family home, but he said he didn't. Even though they found Cheng Chi, the police continued their door-to-door inquiries. Some of the villagers told police that a few days earlier, a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager in the village. They later had a heated exchange where she threatened that when Cheng Wei's mother was hospitalized, he also was in debt for her, and that she would go to their home to collect it if this stranger didn't pay. According to the other villagers, however, the stranger was not Cheng Chi. But even so, there was now speculation that the family could have gone into hiding to escape their debts and lied to their cousin, or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Cheng Chi, that is when they learned that he lied. The villagers confirmed that Cheng Chi regularly went to the area to maintain and work on the home, and that he was always able to open the gate and door on his own, despite no one else being home. To the police, this meant that he must have had a key or access to the home. In fact, he did, because Huang witnessed Cheng Wei hand the key to Cheng Chi. He left the key at the university office and asked Cheng Chi to pick it up for him, and Huang witnessed this exchange. The police returned to Cheng Chi's home and asked for the key. He again denied owning one and said that he used a spare key for renovations, which he returned and thus didn't have access to. As Cheng Chi was far less collected compared to his last line of questioning, Cheng Chi was also deliberately avoiding key details. So when the police threatened to search his home, Cheng Chi became panicked and suddenly remembered that he had another house key that he didn't return. He retrieved the key from his dresser and gave it to the police. Despite his suspicious behavior, there was no direct evidence linking Cheng Chi to the disappearance of the family. So the police put him under surveillance while continuing the investigation, while using the spare key to investigate the home. The inside of the home was a mess and clearly had been ransacked. Investigators also found several fresh blood stains on the wall. Judging by the spread of the blood stains, someone had likely been killed on the property. When police went to the kitchen, they found a sink full of dirty dishes, which poked more holes into the story that they went to China, as they would have left their house a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, the police discovered the family's ID cards in the dresser. The head investigator contacted the border crossing office, and according to them, the family never left Hong Kong. They continued to search the house and found a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in the corner. The police used sniffer dogs to dry and find more evidence, or maybe even the family themselves. The dogs picked up a scent, and 9 meters away found bloodstains under freshly turned over soil. And lastly, even though it was summer vacation, the couple's daughters, Xiaowen and Xiaowen, had signed up for summer school, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation. It became obvious that the family had become victims of foul play, and soon a dedicated task force was established to investigate the case. As it turned out, though, no investigation actually needed to take place. The police, due to the late hour, simply cordoned off the scene and blocked the entrance and exit of Pingche village to outsiders, while placing Sheng-Chi under house arrest as the main suspect. Sheng-Chi quickly confessed. According to Sheng-Chi, he was from Huangpu in Guangdong province and usually lived with his sister, wife, and a 15-year-old and 16-year-old son, whether they are his children, nieces, nephews, etc., etc. Doesn't appear to be explained. Who suffered from memory problems. He used to make a living from motorcycles in Zhongshan City, but in 2006, Guangdong's ban on motorcycles, for obvious reasons, led to a drop in sales and income. Due to his financial troubles, he contacted his cousin Tan Chengwei in Hong Kong and asked if he could help find him some work in the city. Chengwei managed to get Sheng-Chi working at a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars, including board and lodging. After half a month of work, Sheng-Chi wasn't satisfied with his salary, and due to company deductions, he was only getting 220 Hong Kong dollars. He quit his job without notice and returned to China in a fit of anger. In 2007, he moved back to Hong Kong due to the extensive damage that Typhoon Pabuk dealt to his home. The repairs would cost a lot of money, so he asked Chengwei to hook him up with employment in Hong Kong again. Chengwei was unable to find anywhere hiring, so he offered to pay Chengwei out of his own salary if he agreed to help work on his own home. Sheng-Chi accepted this offer. So under this arrangement, every other month, Sheng-Chi would travel to Hong Kong to do work and odd jobs for the household, often tending to their garden and doing repairs to their home. Then, according to Sheng-Chi, he and Enyui began to have an affair behind Chengwei's back, which was discovered by Chengwei. On July 3rd, Sheng-Chi went to Hong Kong, and on July 3rd, took Chengwei to the nursing home to visit his mother. Sheng-Chi then snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Enyui, only for Chengwei to unexpectedly return home early. A furious Chengwei charged toward him and tackled him with Sheng-Chi, saying he had murderous intent in his eyes. In desperation, he grabbed a 25 cm long fruit knife and stabbed Chengwei until he fell into a pool of blood dead. Enyi was understandably terrified by what just happened and wanted to go to the police. Sheng-Chi said that he couldn't let that happen, and since he couldn't dissuade Enyi, he decided to kill her too. He found some wires in the corner of the room and charged toward her, knocking her to the ground and tying her hands behind her back. She then covered her mouth and nose with tape and covered her head with a plastic bag. Before this happened, the couple's two children were in a bedroom watching a cartoon. She screamed at them to run away, but instead ran towards their mother and saw their father dead and Shang-Chi in the process of killing their mother. They too ran into their room crying and locked the door. Since she was already tied up, Shang-Chi abandoned Enyi to head after them. The wails of Xiaowen and Xiaowen are what Wang heard. Picking up a pair of pliers, Shang-Chi pried open the door, and using some more wires, he did what he did to Enya. He tied their hands behind their backs, taped over their mouth and nose, and put a plastic bag over their heads. Shang-Chi left their bedroom and returned to where he was prior to find that Enyi finally stopped breathing. Xiaowen and Xiaowing both suffocated not long after. After killing the whole family, Shang-Chi was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or a body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many bloodstains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold a family of 4 and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before the hole back in. The police, while skeptical about his motive, did believe the rest of the story and brought Shang-Chi to the home, where he pointed to the area that held the sharp knife, a water pipe, a pair of iron pliers, and the other tools used for committing the crime. The police, on July 7th, called the fire department to help with unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and were also wearing gas masks as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. They began digging only to very quickly encounter a problem. They hit cement. Shang-Chi left one detail out in his confession, and that was how he filled the pit with cement before filling it back in. The firefighters were unable to estimate the thickness of the cement, and as it had dried, the tools they brought with them would be incapable of breaking through. The police had to call in a private engineering company who arrived with their high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. The engineering team seemed to have weak stomachs, as when they drilled through and saw human hair, they suddenly lost their nerve and refused to keep digging, as they didn't want to see a dead body. It took the police a total of 13 hours to finally talk them into continuing. After fully digging through the pit was found to be 2.4 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The 4 bodies of the family were found at the bottom all barefoot and only wearing t-shirts and shorts. At the very bottom was Cheng Wei's body. Both of his hands and feet were tied up with electric wire, and he had suffered multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. Enyi's hands and feet were also tied up with electric wires, and a wire was wrapped around her neck. Her mouth and nose were sealed with a yellow transparent tape. Xiaowen's mouth and nose were covered with tape. Her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. And lastly, Xiaowing's face was distorted. Her hands and feet were bound, her mouth and nose were sealed, and her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Enyi, Xiaowen, and Xiaowing had no obvious signs of trauma, which led police to believe they may have been buried alive. Shang-Chi was formally arrested, and when interrogated, he changed his confession. He said that he lied about the affair, but he did try and start one. and come on to Enyi. Enyi was uncomfortable and told Cheng Wei about this. Cheng Wei was enraged and kicked him out of the home and banned him from stepping foot in it again. Afterwards, Shang-Chi returned to the home anyway to apologize, and surprisingly Cheng Wei forgave him. On July 3rd, he returned to the home to start working, and the cousins' relationship seemed to be repaired. Until July 4th, when Shang-Chi again tried to come on to Enyi when Cheng Hui was away. Shang-Chi decided to escalate and attempted to molest and fumble with Enyi, who ran away and called for help, locking herself in her room. Shang-Chi, not wanting the neighbors alerted, fled the home in a rage. On July 5th, Shang-Chi waited for Cheng Wei to visit his mother at the nursing home to try and force his way into the family home again, claiming that he wanted to issue a second apology. Cheng Wei was worried that this would happen, though, and returned home early to see Shang-Chi on the property and trying to get inside to speak to Enyi again. The two got into an argument where, in the heat of the moment, he stabbed Cheng Hui of his own volition and not self-defense. The rest of the confession matched the details of his initial one, but with the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was found that Shang-Chi was still alive. Cheng Hui's murder was far more brutal than Shang-Chi had described. Cheng Hui had suffered from 9 stab wounds on his head and neck, nearly 80 on his body, and 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag, Enyi had been strangled, with the same being true for Xiaowen as well, only Xiaowen's cause of death was as Shang-Chi described. Forensic investigations of the home revealed the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Shang-Chi's, and that Cheng Hui was not killed in the kitchen. He was likely killed elsewhere, and Enyi didn't know until Shang-Chi attacked her neck. The weapon Shang-Chi used was not a kitchen knife from the family, and instead one of his own, and the cement he used to bury the corpses he purchased before the murder, which spoke to premeditation. Through investigations, the police also found that Enyi's bank cards had been used at ATMs after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. And lastly, their cash and bank cards were missing, which meant that the motive was robbery and the crime was premeditated. Like usually, whenever the police pointed out a discrepancy in his story, he suddenly gave a new one. According to Shang-Chi, his ancestral home in China needed repairs, while his 2 children were in school and urgently needed $100,000 in cash to make the payment. He was not well liked in his local area, so if he asked to borrow money, he'd be denied. And whenever he went to Hong Kong, he didn't make much money, so he turned to Cheng Hui for help. Shang-Chi had an idea in his head that Cheng Hui was a miser who was far richer than he appeared, and that the reason he had a low salary when he worked for Cheng Hui was because they were using him for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shang-Chi returned to Hong Kong on his own without telling anyone and waited until July 5, when the couple didn't have to go to work. Having a concealed knife on him, he knocked on the door while Cheng Hui was at the nursing home and talked to Enyi. Once Cheng Hui returned and saw Shang-Chi was there, he asked Enyi to cook something while the two talked. Once Enyi left to go to the kitchen, Shang-Chi almost immediately asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Cheng Hui rejected the request because while he did have the money and even more, he had to spend it on his mother's treatment and his daughter's education. Shang-Chi refused to believe him and accused him of only using him for free and cheap labor. Cheng Hui was angered by the accusation, and when Shang-Chi persisted, he ordered him to leave. Once Cheng Hui turned his back, Shang-Chi charged towards him and covered his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Enyi, Xiaowen, and Xiaoying, searched around the home for cash and the back cards, and then demanded to know the password. Enyi purposefully gave a fake password, but at the time, Shang-Chi didn't know this. Shang-Chi continued to lie about strangling anyone and insisted that he killed the others by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as a plastic bag over their head. When Shang-Chi left for the nearest ATM, he realized he had been lied to when the PIN number wouldn't work. He returned home to find that, in his absence, they had all suffocated to death. Shang-Chi noticed the food that Enyi had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses while he thought of how to dispose of the body. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Cheng Hui's person, he buried the corpses and tools involved in a small pit before going to sleep at his temporary home. The next morning, he woke up and realized that the bodies may be discovered due to the smell escaping from the soil, so he left to buy cement at a store and returned to the home to dig up the pit he had made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole. He would then stay at the home for a little while to answer any calls to Cheng Hui's cell phone or house phone and tell his story about how he was tasked with looking after things while they went on vacation. Shang-Chi said he wasn't expecting the charade to be uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shang-Chi was still lying about many details, such as how he purchased the cement before the murder and the cause of Enyi and Xiaoying's death. But the police at this point had stopped caring about getting a truthful confession, as they felt like they had more than enough evidence to proceed. The trial was held at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010, and he pled not guilty and instead said that his initial story about having an affair with Enyi was actually correct, with Cheng Hui being killed in self-defense and Enyi, Xiaowen, and Xiaoying being killed accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial motives because he was beaten and tortured by the police, with them strangling him and suffocating him with plastic bags until he gave the confession that they wanted. On November 23rd, the jury returned their verdict and unanimously found him guilty of the murder of Cheng Hui, Enyi, and Xiaoying on the charge of murdering Xiaowen. However, he was acquitted and instead found guilty of manslaughter, with the jury split 5-2. This ultimately made no difference, though, as for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter, Shang-Chi received a life sentence. The presiding judge said that Shang-Chi was utterly devoid of a conscious worth, that a beast and completely unrepentant, and accused Shang-Chi of fabricating the self-defense story and the affair with Enyi, not to get a lower sentence, but just to smear their good name post-mortem. Interestingly, Shang-Chi's family living in Hong Kong actually came to his defense, accusing Cheng Hui of being a hypocrite and the true villain who was draining Shang-Chi of his money, pocketing money for his work and from Shang-Chi's salary, and simply using Shang-Chi for cheap labor. The neighbors and residents of Ping-Che village were outraged by these claims, and Shang-Chi's family moved back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history, and an outpouring of support came to the family, with many visiting the home to give condolences and netizens raising more than enough money to hold a funeral for the family. And the family's 9 stray dogs were also adopted and taken in by another family, who every July 5th would take them for a walk in Ping-Che village, near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, at the age of 55, Xu Shengqi passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison of liver cancer. The wilderness called to Michael Silka like a siren, its untamed vastness mirroring the chaos within him. A 25-year-old Illinois native who dreamed of living like the mountain men of old. Born with a fascination for firearms and the wild, Silka's teenage years were a spiral of rebellion, robbing sporting goods stores for camping gear and guns, running away with his brother to the Canadian wilderness until their supplies dwindled, forcing their return. His obsession with 19th century muzzle loaders led to repeated arrests for openly carrying them, fines piling up like leaves in the wind. In 1978, after yet another detention for brandishing his musket, Silka enlisted in the U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. His skill with service weapons shone in basic training, but his unruliness cast a darker shadow. Infractions mounted, discharging his gun in the barracks, assaulting military police, culminating in his discharge in 1981. Back in civilian life, Silka's defiance persisted. In 1982, a traffic stop revealed a .44 caliber revolver, a payout, .22 caliber pistol, and 2 knives in his car. His resistance added a charge, landing him 4 days in jail. In 1983, another stop uncovered a .22 caliber rifle in his backseat. Skipping bail, Silka fled to Alaska's remote embrace, where his descent into violence began. What pushed Silka from restless drifter to mass murderer? His fixation on the wilderness wasn't just escape. It was worship, a need to embody the rugged, lawless mountain men he idolized. But his dreams soured in Chena Ridge, a sparse Alaskan village where he settled. His arrival stirred unease when 34-year-old neighbor Roger Colt vanished, blood staining the snow near his home. Silka, the immediate suspect, slipped away before questioning, his tracks swallowed by the wild. A month later, he surfaced in Manly Springs, a village of just 80 souls, pitching a tent by the boat landing. His outdoor prowess impressed locals, masking the predator within. On May 17, 1984, a group of 6, Fred Burke, 30, Albert Hagen, 27, Lyman Klein, 36, his pregnant wife Joycey, 30, their 2-year-old son Marshall, Dale Madaski, 24, and Larry McVeigh, 38, vanished near that landing. Their absence, reported by frantic family and friends, cracked the village's quiet. Silka's heart held no clear motive, only a twisted impulse that turned admiration for the wild into a need to dominate it with blood. The signature of Silka's crimes burns in the mind, the ghostly absence of his victims, their bodies scattered or swallowed by Alaska's Tanana River. Police scoured the boat landing, finding blood and spent cartridges, grim markers of slaughter. Silka, fleeing upstream in Burke's stolen boat, left no manifesto, no explanation, only carnage. The 6+ cult were not just killed, but erased. Their remains scattered across miles of untamed water and earth. 4 bodies, Burke's found 75 miles away by his wife Lillian, and 3 others surfaced months later, bloated and broken. Culps, along with 3 others, remain lost, as if the river claimed them for its own. Silka's violence was not just murder, but a theft of closure, leaving families to mourn over empty graves. The wilderness itself his accomplice. Silka's evasion was a dance with Alaska's vastness. In Chenna Ridge, he vanished after Culp's disappearance, leaving only blood in the snow. In Manly Springs, he blended in, his tent a quiet fixture by the river, his skills earning nods from locals unaware of his darkness. When the 6 vanished, he fled upstream, the river hiding his path. His bail skipping in 1983 showed his knack for slipping through cracks, and Alaska's sparse population and endless terrain were his shield. No one questioned the quiet man with the tent until blood forced their eyes open. His ability to move unnoticed from Illinois to Canada to Alaska was a skill honed by years of defying law, each brush with police teaching him how to vanish into the next horizon. The hunt for Silka ended in fire and blood on May 18, 1984. 2 helicopters tracked him 25 miles from Manly Springs, their blades slicing the air as officers ordered his surrender. Silka, defiant, answered with gunfire. A single bullet tore through 34-year-old trooper Troy Duncan's head, killing him, and grazed Captain Donald Lawrence's face. The shootout, fierce as Vietnam combat to the officers who lived it, ended when return fire cut Silka down at 25. His body slumped by the river, his motives locked forever in his grave. The search for his victims stretched on, families and authorities combing the Tanana's banks. 4 bodies surfaced, but Culp and 3 others remain missing, their fates woven into the river's secrets. Michael Silka's end came swiftly, but his shadow lingers. Dead at 25, he left no answers, only grief. The families of Burke, Hagen, the Kleins, Madowski, McVeigh, and Culp mourn without closure, their loved ones half claimed by the wild. Manly Springs, once a haven of 80, carries the weight of its loss, the boat landing a silent scar. The rain falls, blurring the line between justice and mystery, as Alaska's rivers flow on, holding their secrets tight, whispering of a man who loved the wild too fiercely and paid with blood that wasn't his own. In the bustling heart of Hong Kong's North Point, Zhang Wanli, a 28-year-old graduate nicknamed Ah-Jae, lived with his fiancée Guo Qian in Kangji Court, their dreams of a 2016 wedding pinned to a new home. In 2012, Wanli and Qian, then 26, began dating, and by October 2015, they held a simple engagement ceremony, signing a contract for their future wedding house, but shadows loom. In 2014, Wanli invested 5 million Hong Kong dollars with a friend, Ah-T, only to struggle retrieving it, borrowing from loan sharks to stay afloat. By 2016, his telecom job vanished in layoffs, and with the wedding faltering under financial strain, Qin urged him to reclaim the investment, pay off their $3 million house loan, and marry sooner. On March 4th, 2016, Wanli told Qian he was heading to Octia's residence on Huya Ojao Street, Suin to secure the $5 million. He kissed her goodbye, promising to return. By dinner, he was gone. Qian called from 5:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m., but his phone was off. On March 5th, she searched Suan Wan, knowing only that Wanli was meeting a man she barely knew. No real name, no address, no number. Desperate, she called the police. What drove Zhang Shangshan to orchestrate Wanli's murder? A 26-year-old schemer, Xiang Shan lived in the Danzig's industrial building with Zhang Shanheng, Kak, 23, Liu Jiahao. Xiang Shan, who met Wanli through business, saw his wealth as a prize, facing debts and a failing organization of petty criminals. He spun tales of a $30 million Australian real estate deal Wanli proposed. On March 2nd, at a meeting with Shanheng, Zihao, and Jingwen, Xiangxin suggested killing Wanli to seize his fortune. Shanheng and Zihao, loyal to Xiangyin's charisma, joined the plot, discussing methods. Drowning. Jingwen, paid 8,000 Hong Kong dollars monthly, thought it was bluster, like their other schemes. But Xiangxin's greed, fueled by Wanli's refusal to release the $5 million, turned fantasy into a deadly plan, pulling Shanheng and Zihao into his orbit. The crime's horror lies in the grotesque sarcophagus that entombed Wanli. On March 4th, Wanli entered the Danzig's building's 9th floor with Xiangxin and Shanheng as seen on CCTV. A fight erupted. Xiangxin strangled Wanli. Shanheng injected 50 milliliters of alcohol into his thighs and ankles, and Zihao, woken by the struggle, pinned him down with chloroform-soaked underwear. Wanli, weakened but alive, was moved to the bathroom where CPR failed. Post-mortem, his body was mutilated, limbs severed, rib cage slashed 11 feet deep, heart and liver lacerated, a blood clot from a blunt head blow. The trio built a 100 ccm wide, 50 cm tall concrete pillar over a mahjong tabletop, encasing Wanli's kneeling body, wrapped in a pillowcase with mothballs to mask decay, his neck tied with hemp rope. 6 wooden boards framed the tomb, sealed with cement bought over days, its weight a monument to their cruelty. Xiangxin's crew evaded capture with calculated precision. After the murder, they lingered in the apartment, Xiangxin and Shanheng buying cement, sand, and gravel on March 5 and 6, measuring the elevator for transport. On March 8, they tried moving the sarcophagus, but its weight triggered the elevator alarm, drawing security. They abandoned the plan, leaving the pillar in the living room masked with air fresheners and mothballs. By March 10th, Xiangxin, Shanheng, Zihao, and Jingwen fled to Taiwan, altering their appearances at a barber and tattoo shop. In Taipei, they hopped between hotels, Baitu, Songshan, Chengmending, before settling in a cheap hostel, their 900 Hong Kong dollars dwindling. Xiangxin confiscated Jingwen's passport, ensuring her silence. Hong Kong police, stymied by Octaz, alias, and disconnected phones, took 4 weeks to trace a lead through Tang. A friend who received Xiangxin's March 19 WhatsApp confessing the murder at flight to Taiwan. The unraveling began on April 10th, when Jingwen, overhearing plans to sell her to a brothel, fled the hostel and surrendered to Taipei's Xinhai police station. She revealed the trio's hideouts, triggering a raid on April 11th. Xiang, Shanhang, and Zhao, unable to pay a 6,000 Taiwan dollar fine for overstaying visas, were deported on April 12th. At Cheklap Kok Airport, Zhao screamed that Xiangxian strangled Wanli while Shanhang injected alcohol, claiming he only hid the body. Hong Kong police, alerted by Jingwen's testimony and CCTV, had already raided Danzig's on March 29th, finding the sarcophagus after a locksmith pried open the door. Firefighters chiseled for 5 hours, uncovering Wanli's decomposed body, 36 kg, mutilated with methylene chloride in his liver, likely strangled. Qin identified him on March 30th, her grief confirming the nightmare. The trial, starting April 10, 2018, faltered when the judge fell ill, dismissing the jury. A retrial began March 18, 2019, delayed by Jingwen's pregnancy, resuming October 14. Zhang Zhan denied masterminding, claiming Wanli sought only 300,000. But the jury, swayed by Jingwen's testimony that no remorse or surrender was discussed, convicted him of murder and preventing burial on December 16, 2019. He received life plus 4 years, 8 months. Shanhang and Zhao, acquitted of murder but guilty of manslaughter and burial prevention, got 17 years each. Jingwen, granted immunity, walked free, as did Qian, Tang, Liao Mogul, Liang Mugul, Liang Muxia, and Kai Muye. Hong Kong still whispers of the sarcophagus, a concrete ghost in Tsuen Wan, where rain falls and Wanli's dreams of a wedding lie buried, his killer's lies crumbling like the cement that failed to hide their sin. The rain falls gently over Hong Kong's North Point, where Zhang Wanli, a 28-year-old mid-graduate known as Ah J, once dreamed of a future with his fiancée, Guo Qian. In 2012, their love took root, and they shared a modest home in Kangji Court. By October 2015, their simple engagement ceremony sealed their bond, a contract signed for a future wedding house with a real estate developer. Their marriage planned for the following year, but shadows crept in. In 2014, Wanli poured 5 million Hong Kong dollars of savings into a venture run by his friend, RT, only to spend a year clawing it back, resorting to loan sharks to stay afloat. Months after their engagement, Wanli's telecom job vanished in sweeping layoffs, leaving the couple scraping by, their wedding dreams fading. Qian, desperate to salvage their plans, urged him to retrieve the $5 million, pay off their $3 million house loan, and marry sooner. On the morning of March 4, 2016, Wanli kissed her goodbye, promising to return after meeting RT to secure the investment's release, leaving Qian waiting in a home that would soon echo with absence. By dinner time, Qin saw no sign of Wanli anywhere, and from 5:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m., she called him several times, but his phone was always off. On the morning of March 5th, she went out to search for him herself. Her only lead is that he was in the Tsuen Wan, but aside from that, she had nothing to go on. While Wanli had known Yi for a while, Qian barely knew him and was ignorant of his real name. home address, or phone number. So due to this, she saw no further recourse than to call the police. The investigation was handled by Hong Kong's Regional Missing Persons Investigation Team. They started the investigation by combing through Wanley's phone records and found that his last call was made on March 4th from Huya Ojiao Street, Tsuen, 1. The police, just like Kian, were at a loss to try and find Ah-T, because in Hong Kong, you are not required to use your real name to register for a mobile phone. Legally, you can use aliases or nicknames, and Ah-T was not just a nickname Wanley used, it was the name registered to the phone. The police attempted to call Ah-T, but his phone was disconnected. The police inquired with the phone provider to see Ah-T's call records. Strangely, he had only ever called 3 numbers, not including Wanley, and each of these numbers was also turned off, and the police couldn't reach them. The police spent the next 4 weeks working with the telecom company to try and track down owners of these disabled numbers and to try and track down their call records. On March 29th, the police finally succeeded. They tracked down a 24-year-old man, simply referred to by his surname, Tang Tang, alongside being one of the owners of the 3 numbers called, was also a personal friend of Ah-T. As soon as the police arrived at Tang's residence, he came prepared. He got out his phone and showed the police a WhatsApp message that Ah-T had sent him on March 19th. The message stated that Ah-T and his friends, Ah-Hao, Ah-K, and others killed someone in their residence before all fleeing to Taiwan. Tang initially thought he was joking and didn't think any more about the message until the police showed up at his door. Tang provided the police with the address, which was the 9th floor of the Danzig's industrial building at Nogo at 26 Huya Ojiao Street, Tsuen Wong. When the police arrived, the room's door was closed, and when the police knocked on the door, nobody answered. The door was locked, so the police went to the front desk. While downstairs, the police also requested access to and reviewed the building's CCTV footage. At 1:00 p.m. on March 4th, Wanley entered the building with 2 men. The 3 took the elevator to the 9th floor. The other 2 were later seen going down the elevator, but Wanley never left. According to the management, one of the men was Ah-K, who shared the rent with him. Unfortunately, management didn't know their real names. At 3:00 p.m., the 2 returned to the building with another man who also helped with the rent. Management identified this man as Ah-Hao. At 5:57 a.m. on March 5th, Ah-Hao entered the elevator alone and didn't leave until 6:02 a.m. At 9:36 a.m. on March 5th, Ah-T and Ah-K pushed 6 bags of cement into the elevator with a trolley. At 5:04 a.m. on March 6th, Ah-T and Ah-K appeared in the elevator with measuring tapes and seemed to be measuring the length and width of the elevator door. At 9 a.m. on March 7th, Ah-T returned after going out for more than an hour, holding 3 objects that looked like jacks in his hand. At noon on March 8th, Ah-Hao returned to the apartment building. At 8:49 p.m., he, Ah-T, and Ah-K pushed a huge concrete block into the elevator on the 9th floor, but because the object was too heavy, the elevator alarm was triggered. They could only move the concrete block out of the elevator after 3 minutes. 2 minutes later, at 8:55, the 3 of them pushed the concrete block into the elevator for the second time. Unexpectedly, The elevator kept calling the police and attracted patrolling security guards, so they had to push the concrete block out again at 10:07 p.m. T walked into another elevator alone for the third time, looked around for a while, and then left. During the daytime on March 9th, IT and AK entered and exited the building several times, one of which was carrying a black suitcase in their hands. At 9 a.m. on March 10th, AK and Ahau left the building together and never came back. After the police told management that Wanley was likely murdered, they had to call in a locksmith to pry open the door, as they unfortunately didn't have a spare key. After the door was unlocked, the police entered the room, and despite no one being there, and the room having been vacant for a while, the AC was still on and running strong, and the scent of air freshener was very noticeable. Some of the floor tiles were pried open, and even more noticeably, a large cement pillar was in the living room. Based on Wanley never leaving the building, the day's worth of concrete, the three transported into the building, and how this pillar wasn't there previously, the police instantly drew their own conclusions. The police called the fire department, who arrived at the building with their heavy-duty tools, usually used for rescuing those from collapsed buildings. The concrete pillar was 100 cm wide and 50 cm tall. The firefighters spent 5 hours chiseling away at the pillar until finally breaking it open. The bottom of the pillar was covered with a standard mahjong tabletop, occupying an area of 87.587, 5 cm with the outer frame removed. A bed of 3 cm thick bedding was placed on the tabletop. A 88 cm wooden floor block also covered the area. As the police had feared, inside the concrete was a decomposed male human corpse in a kneeling position, packed in 6 wooden table boards like this. The body was thin, with his head down, his left hand on his chest and the right hand beside him. He was wearing a white shirt and a pair of black trousers. On his head was a white pillowcase wrapped in 2 layers of plastic bag. A roll of transparent glue was wrapped around the eyes, and a hemp rope was tied around the neck. Inside the pillowcase, the police found 6 mothballs, and several mothballs were found around the body. Due to decomposition, once the police removed the pillowcase, they still couldn't recognize the face, which was unidentifiable. After searching, the police found a work permit of a 27-year-old man, surnamed Liao, at the scene. But aside from that, no other clues or pieces of physical evidence were found. The body was taken away for an autopsy, and all the items, including the remains of the concrete pillar, were brought to the police station for forensic examination. On March 30, the body was identified by Qi and his family as Zhang Guanlei, After an autopsy, the coroner weighed the body at only 36 kg due to excessive blood loss. Wanley's skull was intact, but he had suffered from a blood clot weighing 20 grams in his brain. This clot was caused by a blunt blow to his head inflicted post-mortem. Wanley's body had decomposed from the soft tissues of the limbs, and his right leg below the knee, right arm below the elbow, left wrist, and left foot below the ankle were all severed. Due to some fractures, the coroner suspected that they may have been dismembered post-mortem. There were 2 deep cuts of about 11 cm on the rib cage, resulting in the chest cavity being exposed, and the rest of the abdomen and back also had multiple stab and slash wounds, however. Since there was no blood stain on the clothes and pants, these wounds were said to be post-mortem. The spleen and stomach had completely decomposed, while his kidneys were in the process of decomposition. His lungs likewise were decomposing, but the left one more, so causing the coroner to infer that he may have sustained puncture wounds to the lung. The heart was lacerated with 2 ventricles exposed. The diaphragm was lacerated in several places, and the liver was also lacerated with the stab and slash wounds also occurring after death. So, there were multiple injection marks on the inner thighs and ankles. Based on these injection marks and toxicology screenings, Wanley had been injected with alcohol before death. Methylene chloride was found in the liver. Due to the decomposition and post-mortem mutilation, it was difficult to determine an exact cause of death, but the coroner ruled that strangulation was the most likely cause. As the text message sent to Tang said that they had all fled to Taiwan, the police, taking the footage from the apartment CCTV, went to the airport to show to the airport staff. On March 11th, the 3 boarded a plane to Taiwan alongside a woman. It was also during this check that the police discovered their real names. R.T. was a 26-year-old man named Zhang Shanshan. R.K. was a 23-year-old man named Zhang Shanheng. And Ah-Hao was a 21-year-old man named Liu Exihao. The woman they were seen boarding the plane with was 18-year-old He Jingwen. The police contacted Taiwanese authorities and told them to be on the lookout for the 4. While the Taiwanese police were busy searching for the suspects, the police back in Hong Kong arrested suspected accomplices. The police arrested Shang-Jin's personal friend, 27-year-old Liao Muguro, whose work permit was found on Wanley's body. Tang was also arrested for not reporting the text to the police when he first received it. A 21-year-old man and his 16-year-old girlfriend named Liang Muxin and Kai Muyi were arrested as they were caught on CCTV entering the apartment after Wanley's murder. And soon enough, police began to suspect Wanley's fiancée Guo Qian of being involved, as she had left out several details. Now that they knew his real name, the police checked Shang-Xin's call records and found that Qian had been in contact with him on March 5, having made 3 separate calls. But when Qian reported Wanley's disappearance to the police, the next day she claimed to have no knowledge of him. Qian, based on this fact, was brought in for an interrogation. According to Qian, after Wanley went missing, she accessed the couple's desktop computer and found that Wanley sent a total of 106 emails and messages to RT throughout the day on March 3rd, all of which were urging the other party to return his investment. Qian found RT's phone number via the email and called him on March 4th, but assumed he was asleep as nobody picked up. She called back early on March 5, and this time he answered. According to him, on March 4, Wanley had come to see him, but he was missing the relevant paperwork and sent him back to his home to go gather it. T also urged her not to call the police about his disappearance, as he claimed their arrangement wasn't entirely legal and that the police would confiscate the investment. She finally called the police on March 6th. The police were unsure if Qian was being truthful or not so, and they had no more leads inside of Hong Kong, so, for the time being, they simply had to wait for news from their Taiwanese counterparts. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. On March 31st, Taiwanese immigration authorities, after receiving the report, began their manhunt. On March 11th, they found that the four checked into a hotel near a railway station in Taipei. On April 1, they were classified as unwelcome visitors on the grounds that the purpose of their visit to Taiwan is not consistent with their application. Unfortunately, despite knowing where they are, Taiwanese laws presented a problem. The Taiwan police could not deport the four themselves. Instead, they could only impose a fine of 2,000 for overstaying their visas for 110 days, and then deport those who overstayed again. The visas for the four were for 1 month, and they entered the country on March 11th and expired on April 12th. The expiration date is April 12th. If, however, they are willing to pay a fine of 2,000 Taiwan dollars, they would need to wait until April 23 to deport them. Due to this, on April 4th, they managed to flee and escape from Taiwan's immigration department. On April 10th, at 7:40 p.m., the police finally got a lead. He Jingwen walked into the Xinhai police station in Taipei in a panic. She told the officers that she had witnessed a murder in Hong Kong and that the three murderers took her to Taiwan and confiscated her passport. According to her, when they first arrived in Taiwan, the two hid in a hot spring hotel in Beitou. They then switched to a hotel in Songshan and then one in Samending. Afterwards, they then went to a cheap hostel near the rail station on March 28th. The four were almost out of money, hence choosing the very cheap hostel, bought one room for the four of them, and for food only bought one sandwich a day. By April 8, between the four of them, they only had 900 Hong Kong dollars. Due to this, after Jingwen went to sleep, they began to discuss selling her to a brothel for money. Jingwen was not actually asleep, but just laying down, and overheard this discussion. On April 9th, she snuck out of her room and, using a payphone, dialed her boyfriend's number back in Hong Kong. Her boyfriend raised the money and helped fund Jingwen's return flight, and on April 13th, Jingwen finally returned home. Finally returned home! Upon her return, the Hong Kong police arrested her for conspiracy to commit murder. While still in Taiwan, Jingwen told the police where she was staying, and also on April 11th, the police raided the hostel and confronted Shan Xin, Shan Heng, and Igzahao. The three were charged with overstaying their visas and ordered to pay a fine of $6,000 Taiwan dollars or have their visas revoked. Due to their destitution, they couldn't pay this fine, and the police knew it. The three were also starving to the police, where they agreed to be taken to the police station in hopes they'd be fed. After a full meal, the three confessed to their crimes, with the exception of murder. All three of the suspects pinned the actual murder on someone else, and instead only confessed to helping build the concrete sarcophagus. The Taiwanese police weren't too invested in getting to the bottom of the case and used this confession alone as grounds to deport them to Hong Kong, escorting them through to the airport and into the arms of Hong Kong authorities, who flew to Taiwan to greet them. On April 12th, once the plane arrived at Chek Lap Kok Airport, and the three were placed in handcuffs. After they were placed in cuffs, Dig Xiao screamed that Xiong Xin strangled Wan Li, while Shan Heng injected the alcohol into his body. But all he did was simply dispose of his body. The officers ignored him and didn't ask any questions until the interview at the police station. And at the station, the four gave vastly different testimony. Jingwen was not a direct participant in the murder, so she was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. According to her, she was born in mainland China, but moved and settled in Hong Kong when she was 2 years old. She dropped out of school during her sophomore year to work at a restaurant, which in 2014 is where she met and became friends with Zhang Yang. Due to troubles with her family and boyfriend, she moved to the Danzig's building in 2015. Shan Heng lived in the attic of the room, while Xiang Xin and Zhao lived in a lower apartment with Liang Muxian and Kai Muya. Xiang Shan soon moved into the building, so Jingwen and Shan Heng both lived in the attic. But Jingwen invested she wasn't in a relationship with any of them. While they all lived together, Xiang Shan held their meetings under the name of their and discussed illegal and criminal activities, as well as inviting Jingwen to join their organization. Despite how often these meetings were held, none of what they discussed ever materialized. So Jingwen just accused them of just paying lip service. In spite of this, she still joined the organization because Xiang Tian pledged to pay her 8,000 Hong Kong dollars a month. On March 2nd, the four of them held another meeting during which Xiang Jian suggested killing Wan Li. When asked why, he explained that Wan Li was richer than he had initially appeared and approached him and mentioned an Australian real estate investment which could net them 30 million USD. Wan Li suggested to the others that they could kill Wan Li so they could gain that money themselves. Both Shan Heng and Zihao agreed and began chiming in and discussing their own ideas on how to kill Wan Li and dispose of his body. Jingwen thought that, like with most of their schemes, it was all talk, and on March 3rd, left to move back in with her boyfriend. Jingwen returned on March 4th to find the three arguing with a syringe full of alcohol and were looking at a map. Jingwen at this point realized that they were serious about killing Wan Li. The three settled on a location, the Koan Tong seaside. The four went there, but ultimately ruled this out as a good location due to an abundance of CCTV cameras. Jingwen was planning on visiting Lantau Island with her boyfriend on March 5, so she suggested the body be disposed of there. They returned home, and at 1 p.m. Wan Li entered the apartment after his invitation. Jingwen was asleep in the attic, only to be awoken by the sound of fighting from downstairs. She rushed down to see Wan Li being strangled, and soon Xian Jian said he was dead. Shan Heng and Zhao escorted her back to the attic and said, "It's none of your business. Keep sleeping." The three then spent the next half hour discussing how to dispose of the body. Numerous ideas were suggested, such as bleeding it dry before disposing of him somewhere remote, dismembering his remains and disposing of each, remain in separate parts, and one even suggested boiling and eating his remains so that they could never be found. Ultimately, they settled on sealing him in concrete. At 3:00 p.m., the three went out separately to buy wood, cement, sand, gravel, and the other necessary tools. At first, they bought too little cement, and the store closed, so Wan Li's body was left lying in the middle of the apartment room while they waited until the stores reopened the next day. Jingwen felt uncomfortable being so close to a corpse, so she again left to spend another night at her boyfriend's. She returned at 7:38 p.m. on March 5 to find a concrete pillar erected in the room, but blood was leaking from the cement, and the room had a foul odor. She suggested buying air fresheners, mothballs, and boiled Chinese medicine to mask the stench. As for why they fled to Taiwan, Jingwen wasn't sure. She told the police that while sleeping in her boyfriend's home, when Shan Heng called and said that she and her boyfriend was in trouble as she had witnessed the murder, she was told that he had a relative in the police and that if she didn't drop everything to flee to Taiwan, then she would be hit with the full blame for all the crimes and her boyfriend would be killed. She and her boyfriend often traveled to Japan and kept their passports with them, so in a panic, she gathered her mobile phone and passport and hastily met up with them. Before traveling to Taiwan, the four went to a barber and tattoo shop to change their appearance. Once they landed in Taiwan, Xiangjin took and confiscated Jingwen's passport. This marks the end of Jingwen's testimony. Despite how valuable the police considered her testimony, she didn't witness who actually committed the murder. To find that out, police had to question the other three, and they all turned on each other and pinned that one someone different. And pinned that one. Xiang Shan said that he went with Shan Heng to pick up Wan Li. Once they reached the Danzig's building, Xiang Xin went to the attic to sleep next to Jingwen. Not long after, he woke up after hearing a fight and dispute with Shan Heng and Si Hao yelling for him to come down. When he went downstairs, he saw the three in a fight and stacked on top of each other. Shan Heng was on the bottom with Wan Li on top of him, while Si Hao was on top of him and covering his face with underwear stained with chloroform. Si Hao was furious and screamed at Xiang Xian to give him the injection. Xiang Shan, in a hurry, rushed to Wan Li and injected the alcohol-filled syringe into Wan Li's thigh. After 15 milliliters of alcohol injections, Wan Li was still conscious albeit very weak. According to Xiang Xian, nobody realized that killing someone would be more emotionally and mentally taxing than they had thought, so they moved him to the bathroom to attempt CPR. They unfortunately failed to resuscitate him. Xiang Shan suggested that they all turn themselves in, but Shan Heng and Si Hao were opposed to this. Si Hao suggested cooking and eating the body to destroy the evidence, but Xiang Shan was disgusted by this proposal. Shan Heng suggested dismembering the remains, but Xiang Xian felt they would be unable to do this as they barely had the heart to kill him. He was about to call Tang and ask him for suggestions when one of the two proposed the concrete sarcophagus idea. All three agreed to this new plan. Early the next day, Si Hao went to Singapore to participate in a dancing competition, leaving Xian Shan and Shan Heng alone to build the sarcophagus. Si Hao returned to Hong Kong on March 8th, and the three began to move the sarcophagus. The concrete was, however, too heavy, and once they reached the elevator, blood was still seeping out, and a weight alarm was triggered, so they hastily moved it back into the apartment room. On March 9th, they were at a loss for how to transport Wan Li's corpse. Si Hao suggested breaking it apart and simply putting his body in a suitcase. Both Xiang Shan and Shan Heng agreed to this, so they went to a store to purchase the suitcase and scout Hong Kong for disposal locations. Once they found one that satisfied them, they returned to Danzig's, only to find the cement had hardened and they could not extract Wan Li's remains on their own. After much discussion, the three settled on simply abandoning the body and fleeing. The reason why Taiwan was chosen is because Sihao was familiar with the country, so Xiang Jian asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars from his family. He never intended on bringing Jingwen with him, but Zihao insisted. Xiang Zhan also told the police that he planned on surrendering and wasn't expecting Jingwen to do it first. This was Xiang Jin's testimony, which was vehemently denied by the others. Shan Heng told police that he met Xiang Zhan at a Halloween party in Lang Kwai Fong, and that he was responsible for all of his expenses, so he very much admired Xiang Xian and obeyed his every command. When the murder happened, he was in a cubicle reading over some files and reports concerning the three's expenses when he heard fighting from the living room. He rushed inside after hearing the two fighting and saw Zihao covering Wanley's mouth and nose with the chloroform-dosed underwear. He rushed towards them to try and separate the two, but by this time, Xiang Xin returned with the alcohol syringe and wearing white gloves. He, before Shan Heng could do anything, injected the contents into Wanley's thigh and ankle. Shan Heng attempted first aid and CPR, but Wanley could not be saved. He insisted to the police that the only role he played in the murder was purchasing the items used to build the concrete sarcophagus. All the wounds and mutilations to Wanley's corpse were by Zihao and Xiang Jin. When the three fled to Taiwan, Shan Heng also denied Xiang Jin ever showing remorse, or that he gave any indications of turning himself into the police. According to Zihao's testimony, he was asleep and didn't even know they brought Wanley to the apartment until the sound of fighting woke him up. Or rather, he, who was sleeping in the living room, was woken up when Wanley suddenly rushed in and fell on top of him. He tried to push Wanley off of him while attempting to get the others to stop, but both Shan Heng and Xiang Xin jumped on top of Wanley and tried holding him down. Shan Heng used the chloroform-dosed underwear and yelled at Xiang Xin to retrieve the alcohol syringe from the attic. Xiang Shan returned downstairs and stabbed Wanley with the syringe in his lower body and ankles for about 2-3 minutes until Wanley stopped moving. Zihao told the police that he was completely blameless in the actual murder and that he only helped dispose of the body to avoid being implicated in it. He proposed throwing his body in the sea, but Xiang Jin refused instead, suggesting dismemberment, which Zihao was against. Xiang Xin then suggested the sarcophagus, which all were in favor of. The reason why Wanley's face was covered in plastic was because Xiang Jian couldn't bear to look at it. Zihao then went to Singapore for the competition, but Xiang Jian demanded that he come home to help them. Zihao denied forcing Jingwen to come with them, and even warned Xiang Jin against it, but he was afraid she'd tell the police, so he ordered Shan Heng to make a threatening phone call, compelling her to come to Taiwan with the three of them. The three stood by their testimonies and refused to waver from them. The trial began on April 10, 2018, and the three were put to a jury trial. On the 27th day of proceedings, the presiding judge fell severely ill and unable to perform his duties, so the jury was dismissed. The retrial began on March 18, 2019, but had to be delayed due to the main witness, Jingwen, becoming pregnant. On October 14, 2019, the Hong Kong High Court finally completed jury selection for the retrial, and proceedings began again. In court, Xiang Shan denied that Wan Li wanted him to return the investment in full and instead simply asked to borrow some money, only 300,000 instead of 5 million. He claimed that he couldn't be the mastermind because he had no motive to kill Wan Li and had no intention on getting rid of his debts. The prosecution refuted his claims. They attacked Xiang Jin's claims of remorse and his plans to turn himself in, as Jingwen, who actually did go to the police, explained that none of the three were remorseful, and the topic of surrender hadn't come up even once, which further disputed Shan Heng's new claim in court that he also wanted to turn himself in. Xiang Shan also made the claim that he had attempted CPR, but according to Shan Heng and Zhao, no such attempt was made, and he even stopped others from attempting to resuscitate him. Shan Heng's defense attorney pointed out that Zhao and Xiao Xin had at numerous times manufactured ecstasy, and without their knowledge drugged both Shan Heng and Jingwen to test its effect. Jingwen, when cross-examined, also recalled instances of drinking spiked water, according to Tang, who was called to testify. Back in February, he asked him where he could sell ecstasy. This is relevant because Shan Heng's attorney brought up how his client, being one of Xiang Yan and Jiao's unwilling test subjects, the fact that the two were doing this had all demonstrated a history of criminality. Shan Heng being an unwitting accomplice, and how Xiang Jin and Zhao had no remorse and were trying to skirt responsibility. On December 13th, the jury began their deliberation. Deliberations lasted 3 days, but on December 16th, the jury found Sang Qian to be the mastermind and returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of preventing the lawful burial of a dead body. On the murder charge, the judge handed down a life sentence. For the prevention of a burial charge due to Xiang Xian pleading guilty on that one, he was given 4 years and 8 months added to his life sentence. The jury acquitted Zhao and Shan Heng on the charge of murder, and instead found them guilty of manslaughter. Both were sentenced to 17 years imprisonment to run concurrently with their sentence for preventing Wan Li's burial. Due to the plea deal, Jingwen never faced any charges. The suspected accomplices, Guo Qian, Liao Moguo, Tang Liang Mujian, and Kai Mui, also never faced any charges. This remains one of the most infamous crimes in Hong Kong's recent history.